Hello, everyone, and welcome to Quantumrun-on-One, a podcast where we interview leading experts, researchers, and thinkers to gain their insights into the emerging trends and innovations that will reshape our world over the next 2 decades. My name's David Tall, and I'm your host. In this episode, we're interviewing Robin Farmanfarmaian. You might remember Robin from our Life in 2030 podcast that discussed the topic of transhumanism and becoming superhuman. Well, we got so much great feedback from that episode that we decided to invite her back. Robin's a professional speaker, an angel investor, a VP in 2 medical startups, Invicta Medical and Actavalon, and she sits on the board of directors for the Organ Preservation Alliance. During our chat, Robin shares her deep well of experience and insights into some of the latest news and trends happening in the healthcare industry. So without further ado, here's a conversation with Robin. Robin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. I mean, we've been looking forward to having you back on the show for a while now. And, our listeners really enjoyed the insights you shared with us the last time you were on. Now, I think the last time we spoke was around the tail end of 2016. I think it was last November or so. And from what I hear, you started off 2017 in a big way by joining the biotech company Actavalon. I was reading more about it, and it seemed like it's doing some fairly unique work in the cancer treatment space. Can you tell me more about that?
Absolutely. So it's an incredibly exciting company. To give you a little background on what I do, I sit inside of companies, usually 3 to 5 at a time, and do very high-level business development, very strategic, and the strategic outlook on types of ways that you're going to be getting money from distribution to funding. Mm-hmm. And so at Actavalon, what we are doing is curing cancer by repairing the P53 part of the cell, the human cell. It's a protein. Now, why this is so incredibly innovative and exciting is because the P53 part of the human cell, this was actually discovered in the 1970s. But now technology has advanced enough that we are able to actually potentially start working with this in a very meaningful way. And in fact, pharma companies have tried unsuccessfully up till now to use that for other purposes, whether oncology or something else. But what happens in the world of cancer is when P53 of the human cell is damaged, cancer can get into the cell and take it over and then replicate, right? Mm-hmm. When the P53 part of the human cell is intact, it naturally shuts down the cancer. So we all have cancer in us all the time. We all have it, 100% of us. What happens is because of the 53 part of the human cell, it doesn't end up taking over our body so that we don't quote unquote get cancer. Right. Though it all exists. And so this is the natural mechanism. We are going in there and actually repairing it. So that means more than 50% of all cancer cases have P53 damage to them. So our goal of repairing it means we will cure more than 50% of all cancer out there.
That's amazing.
Right?
I mean, that definitely sounds like a more than promising approach to tackling cancer. I mean, just thinking back to myself, I lived through a brief lymphoma scare back in my early 20s that myself and my doctors were lucky enough to catch early. Obviously, that's not the case for everyone. That said, I'm sure you'd agree that advances in cancer research have been made that we've been seeing these past couple of years has been fairly crazy, for lack of a better word. Alongside the Actavalon approach by targeting the P53 protein, and there's news from UK researchers who are trying to create a cancer vaccine customized to the patient, new cancer immunotherapy injections. I remember Vice doing a profile not too long ago about US researchers trying to re-engineer viruses to attack cancers. From your perspective, when you're talking with your colleagues in the space, what do you think is the future of fighting cancer? Do you think we could see the end of most cancer deaths in our lifetimes?
Oh, yeah. So it's going to be cell therapy, immunotherapy. What we're doing, this is what's going to end up curing cancer and eradicating it. Well, actually just keeping it under control because we just need to live with it harmoniously, right? Because we're not going to, cancer is not something that you eradicate like polio. Right. It's not a similar thing at all. But the way we've been treating it up till now, we're essentially just poisoning the cancer and poisoning the human being with chemotherapy. It is so rudimentary when you are talking about how we try and treat other diseases, and how we will be over the next 10 or 20 years treating diseases no longer by just trying to kill them like antibiotics and chemotherapy drugs, but working with them and working with the natural ability of the body to fight off or live symbiotically with some of these other organisms. I mean, if most people probably aren't aware of the microbiome yet, like you are in certain parts of the country, everyone knows about it, and then parts of the
Hmm.
country and parts of the world, people have never heard of it. So it's just a something that hasn't quite reached the educational distribution yet.
I
But
guess it depends on who really likes their, probiotic yogurts and all that good stuff.
well, I mean, it really comes down to this: is that the body, we are 50% bacteria, fungi, and viruses.
Hmm.
50% human cells. I mean, it's about 1 to 1.3 ratio. We are literally 50% bacterial and other cells. And we haven't been taking this into account in medicine. So we will start to see this being taken into account in things like cancer, right? Alzheimer's, all of these big diseases that we could potentially thought were genetic could in fact turn out to be infectious through the microbiome. So that's another big area that we're going to be seeing: cell therapy, like and immunotherapy, but also microbiome therapy.
Interesting. So we're gonna come back to that in a little while, but I just wanted to take a few steps back for a moment. I wanted to talk more about your background a bit, and obviously you have a heavy emphasis in the healthcare space. Was medicine and health research always a passion of yours? What drew you to the field?
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, first of all, I was brought up in a household with a pediatrician for a mother and a patent attorney for a father who was a chemistry major at MIT. Like, I'm in a
Wow.
science family that works in cutting edge medicine and technology and on the front lines as well. So, it was my life anyway. But then I have a very powerful back history in the world of healthcare. At the age of 16, I was misdiagnosed, and all told, I've had 43 hospitalizations, 6 major
Wow.
surgeries, and 3 organs removed. And so at the age of 26, about 7 years after they had taken out my large intestine, my doctors were telling me I was cured and put me on 80 milligrams a day of methadone to fight the corresponding pain I'd had from so much abdominal surgery.
Hmm.
And I was like, essentially, this is wrong. You're not treating me correctly, and I should not be in this kind of pain, and essentially unable to do very much. There has to be other reasons and other ways to treat what's going on wrong with me. And so I fired my healthcare team. I rebuilt it and ended up getting diagnosed correctly, put on a medication called Remicade. It's a anti-tumor necrosis factor,
Okay.
small molecule, a biologic, and I went into remission overnight.
Wow.
So I have vowed now to make an impact. I literally, this is my goal: 100 million patients or more worldwide. And I work on companies that will impact a minimum of 100 million patients worldwide. So right now, that's why I'm working in sleep apnea. I'm working in curing
Hmm.
cancer, and I'm working in virtual reality and neural platforms, initially for things like stroke and paralysis rehabilitation, but also PTSD, depression, pain management, a significant number of diseases and problems we are going to be starting to see be treated with virtual reality over the next 1 to 10 years.
Wow. So I guess that's something I wanted to ask you about as well. From what I've been reading for the past few decades, the story around healthcare and medical research in general is that, while progress is being made, the rate of new discoveries has been slowing down. And, I remember a few colleagues bringing up the term Ehrum's law, the opposite of Moore's law, that described that the observation where the number of drugs approved per billion in R&D dollars has actually been halving every 9 years or so, adjusted for inflation. But, it almost feels like this trend is beginning to break. What do you feel is the healthcare industry still struggling to release blockbuster new treatments in a consistent pace, or is the healthcare industry finally beginning to follow the tech industry where it comes to exponential acceleration, both in terms of new treatments, but also obviously in terms of how we diagnose treatments that's relevant in your case?
So I would argue that it actually is moving as quickly. It just doesn't feel like it
Hmm.
because there are some barriers to entry. So the technological advancements are incredibly game changing and exciting in the world of medicine, and not just the past like 8 to 9 years since the iPhone and the smartphones came out, but for the past 30 years. I mean, the drug alone that put me into remission and the reason I am alive today is a drug called Remicade, and that was just the first of an entirely new class of drugs called biologics. This was
Hmm.
a big deal, game changer, right? So we are seeing these kinds of things over and over again. But what's happening is that the healthcare system in the United States, it's a $3 trillion a year industry that is the size of the GDP of Germany, right? So
Right.
when you think you don't think things are moving like I hear this a lot, in magazines and all of that, that tech isn't moving as fast in medicine. I'm like, I'm sorry, you think that a $3 trillion industry is going to show you that quickly? It is absolutely. Things like Kaiser Permanente, their CEO said that by 2018, more than 50% of their clinic visits are going to be done virtually. I'm seeing tons of sensor companies, all of those early companies like Fitbit and all the wearables. Those are the low hanging fruits for
Right.
the accelerometers and stuff. Well, it just actually takes an actual amount of time to go through FDA approval. So the reason we don't see a lot of clinical grade wearables and therapeutics yet is because it takes a couple of years to do the R&D, and then you've got to get validated clinical trials. Those take actual time and money more so than getting a Fitbit to market. So these companies that are in this are in it for 4 or 5 years before you actually hear of the product. But these products are already existing or being worked on. Things like sensors and socks that measure gait for neurodegenerative diseases or measure ulcers for diabetics. Uh, Contact lenses, right, that are measuring things. Actually, one just recently got FDA approval for glaucoma progression.
Is that the
We're
one that
seeing,
Google is funding?
no, Google is funding something else in partnership with Novartis. It's Verily, which is Google's life sciences
Hmm.
department, and that is for glucose monitoring.
Okay.
One of the limiting factors when we are talking about contact lenses and the sensors and why they don't have it on the market yet, but hopefully they're hoping to have it out, I think, by next year, like a workable product, is but not out, to the distribution, is that the sensor technology are thick. And so when you put them on your eye, it's actually the contact lenses are still a little bit thick, so it's uncomfortable for the patient, right? But
Okay.
and there's a couple other like little barriers in terms of that particular technological application. But again, we do already have an FDA approved contact lens sensor device that tracks something.
So you've talked a little bit about what's holding back medicine and healthcare in terms of the speed of release of certain new healthcare medicines or technologies, such as FDA approval, testing on animals, then testing on humans, the patent process, and all of that. Are there two or three trends that you feel are accelerating the pace of healthcare research or healthcare discovery these days?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Data. So suddenly, scientists, academics, technologists, engineers, all these people in Silicon Valley, startups from all over the world, we have access to information and data that were siloed before because of a world of connectivity, and then being able to take this amount of data and provide and apply artificial intelligence to it to come up with big insights. So yeah, that is going to so accelerate some different scientific and medical discoveries over the next couple of years that the insights are going to literally be game changing.
And it's interesting because with the progression of genomics in terms of like how quickly the price of sequencing a genome is falling, I've read something where the rate of genome sequencing is falling by 5 times every 2 years or so, whereas Moore's law is only doubling its transistors every 2 years. So it's almost that tech hardware is becoming the bottleneck for the genomics industry, where now you're collecting so much data from the genome, especially the microbiome, where that has so much more genetic material than the human does. But we just don't have the raw computing power yet to actually process all of this genomic data and try to make sense of it. Is that something that you're finding with your colleagues?
So I'm not working directly on data analytics and AI, but what I am hearing about is lots of companies doing things to make it easier, like stitching the data
Hmm.
together. This is a very big problem because what we want to do is we want to layer data over other data sets. You want the genomic data combined with the EMR data, combined with the environmental data, combined with the microbiome data. These are all architected in different ways. They don't fit in together so that you can apply algorithms and come up with insights, right? So there are companies working on ways to stitch all of that data together so that it is homogeneous and that you can come up with insights into
Great.
it.
So I guess, putting all these factors together, all these trends, how do you feel healthcare will be experienced by the average person, 10 or more years from now? Obviously, the awful experience you went through is one side of the extreme, but, how do you think, a future you would have experienced or will experience healthcare 10 years from now or 15 years from now?
So that is such a great question. So it's going to be mostly done in my home or on demand wherever I am.
Hmm.
And it's going to be personalized, not just precision medicine, which is a treatment plan based on the individual, taking into account things like their genomic data.
Hmm.
But in addition, healthcare when you want it, where you want it, and how you want it received. Right. It's the patient that is going to be the one who is going to be driving how their healthcare works around them. And the reason is because we are starting to see a lot of things like point of care diagnostic devices coming into the home. We have sensor technology in our homes and smartphones over the next 10 years that will be, the Internet of Things that will work with you. So you could have your toilet collecting your microbiome on a daily basis and analyzing that, working with your sensored up refrigerator to order the right kind of food at the right time for your particular body type.
Hmm.
Reminders where your pills all have sensors on them so that you know if you've taken them on a daily basis and it reminds you automatically. And in 10 years, we're not going to have things like smartphones the way they exist now. In 10 years, we're going to be living with a significantly more mixed reality, virtual reality, and augmented reality.
Hmm.
So when we want to see the dashboard, essentially we're all going to have dashboards on our health, right? And it's going to
Okay.
aggregate our data and just give us a report card, essentially minute by minute breakdown. But it's not going to be on the iPhone. It's actually going to be in the air or wherever you look, right?
Hmm.
It's not going to be attached to a device. So just the way we interact with our individual worlds in general outside of healthcare is going to so dramatically shift over the next 10 years because of augmented and mixed reality that our healthcare is going to follow suit in how we then experience it around us.
So do you think with that progression, that 24/7 monitoring of your health, do you think that people's experience with healthcare will that transition into a kind of subscription service where you subscribe to some kind of health monitoring service where AI or real doctors will basically monitor your health in real time based on the implants in your body or the wearables that you carry around with you? And if something ever comes up, whether it's an injury or an illness that's about to make you feel sick, then they'll take action and then you'll be charged accordingly. What are your thoughts around how the business of healthcare will evolve when these new technologies come into place, and how we'll fund healthcare in the future if these technologies help to make healthcare that much more available?
So I'm not sure how they will be funded in general because it's politically based,
Hmm.
and so I'm a technologist, not anything to do with politics.
That's fair.
So yeah, so that's going to be all rules and regulations around that. But yes, I am already seeing subscription models working well. And really interesting ones too that are very disruptive business models. Things like Talkspace. Talkspace is online therapy. What you do is you text or you use the web app with your therapist 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whenever you feel like it. The other cool thing is that they choose your therapist based on artificial intelligence using your personality. But the really cool, innovative business model is that this is all for $99 a month. It is a
Hmm.
reoccurring subscription model monthly. So that's about $1,200 a year. And you have unlimited access to your therapist who has been matched to you specifically.
That's great.
right? So we're seeing that. And then I just came back from Plug and Play yesterday, and I talked to some companies, a company whose founder is just finishing up her MIT executive MBA. And they're doing things like taking wearable technology, data, right,
Hmm.
aggregating that and coming up with insights. So they're the software, right? They're device agnostic. They pull in data and they say, hi, this kid is autistic. And they are monitoring his entire environment and his health, right, at the same
Okay,
time, and then coming up with insights. That is already being done now.
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the things I always like to do with our guests is I want to get a quick sense of what's piquing your interest these days outside of the handful of companies and organizations you manage. Is there one or two news stories or headlines that's come out recently that's really got you excited or intrigued in some way? As is there something that's really caught your attention recently?
Yes, that a company or an academic, I can't remember which one it was. I can Google it. In China, has successfully 3D printed skin.
Oh, wow.
I know. Okay, so L'Oreal is also working in something like this, which is a really interesting concept. I'm seeing a lot of big corporations who are not in medicine whatsoever putting a large amount of their R&D dollars into developing technologies that you would think would be medicine, like L'Oreal Cosmetics.
So
They're
is
putting our, oh, go ahead.
sorry, so with the research or discovery into growing skin, is that more for burn victims, or is that more for trying to rejuvenate existing skin, like replacing your old or wrinkly skin with new, young, and vibrant skin?
See, it doesn't matter. It's just that it can be done. So
Hmm.
then the use applications are anything you want them to be, whether that is burn victims or yeah, rejuvenation, or for in L'Oreal's particular case, the reason they've put so much money and made such headway in tissue engineering of skin is because they want to replace animal testing.
Oh, okay.
And so they are going to be testing all their cosmetics on 3D printed skin of human tissue. And then it also looks like, like, I'm sorry, but that blush is not going to look the same on me as it did on Mr. Mouse over there, right?
Right. From what I read, I thought the industry was moving to the whole, I forget the proper term, but it's like a body in a chip, where instead of testing on animals, you're basically testing inside of an organic chip that simulates internal organs or the internal processes of a body and in a very minute way. Is that something that you've heard about, or?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, they're called organs on a chip.
Yes, that's what I
We're
meant to
also
say.
able, yeah, exactly, and we're also able to 3D print tiny little, just tiny 3D printed human liver and kidneys, right? So, and yes, to test drugs on these, and that is a very big deal because 20% of drugs fail in late stage clinical testing
Hmm.
because they are toxic to the human
Wow.
kidneys. But we don't find that out until we get to human studies that far out. Now we can find that out in a much earlier phase by testing on a human kidney that has been grown in the lab.
I mean, I guess one of the outcomes of all of this research in terms with Actavalon in your company trying to stamp out cancer, these companies trying to find new ways of growing organs, all of the traditional ways that people succumb to death in terms of whether it's disease or organ failure, those are slowly being either controlled or eradicated. Do you think, all of these discoveries or paths of research, how is that going to impact human longevity in general, because that's also a big hot button topic in your field?
Absolutely. So that's why I like the tissue engineering world because it's the United States largest killer is organ failure
Hmm.
because heart disease, of course, is the failure of your heart. So organ failure literally is the number one killer in the United States. Up to 900,000 people die, could be, actually die a year from organ failure
Wow.
in the U.S. And a significant number of them could be delayed or prevented altogether with an organ transplant. So when we're able to 3D print and tissue engineer organs on demand, and when you start to get sick with heart disease or liver or anything, instead of treating this with surgery or a medication, instead just switch out the organ.
Hmm.
And this is going to dramatically increase a significant number of lives by 10 or 20 years.
Wow.
Right. So while some people are trying to work on it on a cellular level of, literally reversing aging or curing aging, I'm looking at it as, okay, so how can we do these incremental 10 to 20 year life, and these
Hmm.
aren't just life extenders, but they are allowing you to have a much more robust life if we can eradicate things like heart disease with just on demand switching out your organs type of thing. It's
Right.
a big deal.
And do you think there's a bit of a competition between organic replacements and machine replacements? Traditionally, people have been more comfortable with mechanical replacements of organs and limbs. I mean, I think the oldest human prosthetic was over 3,000 years old, found in a sarcophagi in Egypt, where a noble woman had prosthetic toe. So I think people technically have a longer track record of being comfortable with mechanical or machine based prosthetics, whereas anything that's biological, people might have some fears around or some religious difficulties with. What do you see in this competition between machine and organic replacements to entire limbs or organs? Is there one that you think will win out?
Oh, absolutely organic. If when people are going to want, if they're missing a limb, if and we have the capabilities, because of course these capabilities do not yet exist,
Hmm.
but if you could have a robotic arm that you strap on, or if they could somehow give you back an almost virtual identical model of your previous arm that you just lost in this accident, what would you choose?
Yeah, well, for me, it's the organic.
Right. I mean, it's just that there has been zero way to do that. Right. It wasn't even a hope before the past few years.
Hmm.
And now we're getting to a point where Nina Tandon is growing bone in the lab. There are other, we've now done skin. Other companies are working on muscle tissue. I mean, you can see the whole meat industry, right?
Right.
So people wanting to do, and that's muscle, right? That's all that is. Muscle is muscle.
Hmm.
That's all food, the meat that we eat from beef, right? So now, and then there's Jennifer Lewis's, and I love how all these are like rock star academic scientist women who are doing these massive breakthroughs. Because Nina Tandon, massive breakthrough, the bone in the lab, and then Jennifer Lewis at Harvard, massive breakthrough with capillaries.
Wow.
Right, tissue engineering capillaries. So what we need to do is just be able to perfect all of these different components of say an organic limb,
Hmm.
right? And then find, and then, but it's going to be a while. Like that will be more along the lines of 20 years out, at least, I'm guessing. It's just we have to perfect one individual thing, which we haven't done yet. We're just so early in this particular industry.
Hmm.
But yeah, we'll be able to do it. And I can't imagine why we wouldn't.
That's great. I think that's a good place to end our discussion on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for stopping by and sharing your insights today. And I guess before we wrap up, can you share with us, where people can learn more about you online and how they can reach out to you?
Sure. So I am the only Robin Farmanfarmaian in the entire universe, and every single result that you get with Google for the first 10 to 20 pages, literally, is me. And it's very, 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 very easy to find me. So go ahead and ping me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. Tell me how you found me. And I have a website, thepatientceo.com, and my book is on Amazon, and it's called Be Patient as CEO.
So, what do you think? Will cancer deaths become a thing of the past in 15, 20 years' time? What trends do you think will help accelerate innovation in the healthcare space? As always, send your thoughts about the insights Robin shared with us at feedback@quantumrun.com. We'll publish the most thoughtful feedback on our website. Or read more about the topics we covered today on our website, quantumrun.com. Again, I want to thank our guest, Robin Farmanfarmaian, for joining us. And the podcast music you're listening to now was composed by Karl Gutowski. Finally, want to support the show? Then be sure to subscribe to it on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or anywhere else you find your podcasts. And while you're there, be sure to like, heart, share, review, and recommend this podcast to your friends. It really does help. That's it for now, but be sure to join us for another episode of Quantum Run-on-One.